Hello, welcome to Den Bahamians. Today we're here at the National Book Fair 2013, Bahamas, and we are going to be talking with Michael Wells. Michael has been disabled from birth, and he's a Bahamian author. He has written 9 books, and he actually is disabled from the neck down, and it's very interesting the way how he has been communicating via the computer. And it's also very interesting the way how he has taught himself. He has been self-taught through the computer. Welcome, Michael. It's a pleasure having you. I'm doing good, I'm doing good. Tell me, Michael, when did you first become interested in television and thought that there was some value to learning through television?
About 4 or 5, 6, 7.
8 years old?
About 8 years old.
8 years old. Okay. And did your parents understood what you was asking for before that? Were they able to understand what you wanted?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. And when did they find out that you were understanding what you were seeing through television? When did they learn that there was some value to y'all sitting in front of the TV for many hours?
They always realized that he was a bright child.
Okay,
He didn't get formally tested till he was in his late teens.
In his teens?
Yeah,
Okay.
There was nobody who knew how to test him in the Bahamas.
Uh-huh.
There were some doctors that came over from the U.S.
Uh-huh.
And they tested him and found out that just through him sitting in front of the television and learning from Sesame Street and the rest of it, he was at his age level
Wow.
for schooling at the time.
Uh-huh.
So he's basically self-taught.
So he's self-taught, So he just watched Sesame Street, or he watched other documentary?
There were other things, but the basis of the ABCs and all that was Sesame Street, right?
Yeah, okay, All right, and so he has written several books. When did he first become interested in writing?
Basically what happened was in 1968, my father went to Ireland, and while he was in Ireland, my father is a very voracious reader.
Okay.
And he found that there was this handicapped writer in Ireland, and he started reading his books. And this guy had no arms and had to type with his toes.
Right.
So when he realized this, upon coming back home, he realized that with Michael's intelligence, he could become a writer. And he purchased him a correspondence course in journalism. And once Michael was finished with that, computers kind of came around.
Okay.
And once computers came around, they got him a stick. And because he has control of his head, he just pecked on the keyboard with the stick. And because of this stick, the whale that they call a unicorn with the one horn. That's why the books that he eventually came up with was the unicorn. So my father helped him really get started in a magazine.
Okay.
News, views, and other topics on the disabled. And he did about 4 or 5 of those magazines before moving on to short stories.
Okay.
And he's kind of gravitated totally into short stories now.
Oh, he likes short stories.
Right, Michael?
Yeah. So his the journalism course was he had to read, and how did he do his homework? I mean, how did someone type it for him, or?
I don't know exactly how it goes.
I did.
You did type. Typed it. Yeah, he typed it.
Okay, so a typewriter came around the same time as the computer, the same time as the journalism, and he was able to do his homework on the computer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that's very good. And so this is his ninth book, and they all are the Unicorn, or is there some
Yeah, the
other?
unicorn is basically what it's called because it started out with his stick. So just like Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, the unicorn. And so
So
it's a common heading for all of his books.
I see.
Whether they be magazines or short stories.
I see.
I normally have no problem selling.
Okay.
I think your normal run is about what, 300 to 500.
Yeah.
His normal run is about 300 to 500
Per book.
Yeah, I sell about 100 of them, and
That's beautiful, beautiful. So are you writing another one? But now, when you do short stories, what are the short stories about? I hadn't a chance to read.
they're about all various topics, but he most of the time likes to put a disabled person in, and he wants to show the world that disabled persons are involved in all facets of the community, including once or twice in a crime story.
Interesting, interesting. So is he working on anything at this?
Well, he continues. He's continuously working on stories, and whenever there's enough of them to put a book together, he calls, emails his publisher because he's very good at email.
Okay, okay.
And his publisher comes over and takes out the best of them and then puts them in a book, and he just continues on. It takes him about 2 to 3 years for each book.
For each
to
book.
compile enough stories to put in a book. Normally he puts in about half dozen, or a half dozen stories in each book.
So how many hours a day does he stay on the computer writing?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All day?
All day? Basically all day.
All day.
Yeah, that's,
Okay.
The computer has opened up a whole new world for him in communication that for to now only his close family would, you know. And it's interesting because after his first sales of his first couple of books, he just jettisoned his family and got 2 friends and their son and went on a Caribbean cruise.
Interesting.
And I think he has all the pictures on his website.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, yeah. So are there any friends that are, disabled friends that he communicates with through Facebook or?
Yeah.
He's answered that for himself.
Yeah, okay. Very interesting. What about there in Freeport? On Grand Bahama, where he stays in Grand Bahama, or he stays here?
No, he stays here, but he communicates with me through the email.
Through email.
Yeah, he's always asking me how my kids are doing, and the rest of it is it's no barrier at all. You would never think that to see him, you would never think he's in this manner through his
communication, email.
Emails are normal.
So now, does he have a sponsor or who publishes?
Not really, no. One or 2 of his magazines had a sponsor. Sometimes his family would help him out. Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, his uncle Carlton sometimes.
Okay. So when was he last published? When was his last?
Yeah, this came out this year.
This year.
Press, that one is hot off the press. About 3 months ago.
3 months ago. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, but Michael, this is very Michael Wells. Wells are originally from Long Island, aren't they?
Yeah. They're loyalists from Long Island. Yes.
Yeah. So you said yeah.
Yeah, my father's sister is his mother.
Oh, your father's okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so he's my first cousin.
He's your first cousin. Okay.
So
okay.
My aunt is his mother.
Okay. Interesting, because I connect the Wells from Long Island, Bahamas.
Right. So she married into Wells. And he's the product of that marriage.
Okay. So he has a loyalist lineage.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Michael, it's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah.
And I wish you the best of luck and much success with your book. Yeah. So it's unicorn number 9 going on unicorn number 10 then.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's another 2 years with another unicorn.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Okay. All the best. Okay. It's a pleasure having you on, Damn Bahamians.
Yeah.
You have to check me out on the internet. I'm on the computer also. This show is called Dem Bahamians. Dem Bahamians TV. We're on YouTube.
Yeah, so he'll
Yeah,
check you out.
so you check me out, and it is also seen every Monday. Dem Bahamians is seen every Monday on the internet. It's www.mnn.org. Click on channel 1, and you'll see my show every Monday at 2 o'clock. Yeah. So if you miss me on at a regular time, check us out on YouTube. Okay? And don't be surprised if you check us out, you still see this interview on YouTube. Okay? So I wish you the best of luck. And thank you for being my guest today. Okay? Super, Michael. Great. Okay, thank you.
In 1868 to 1876, they were used in Landrail Point, Crooked Island, to bring quarry to build a lighthouse. In 1869 to 1910, it was mostly sisal hand-powered rails, and in the case of Mastic Point Andros, they had donkey-powered rails. Now in sisal, as you will learn later on, it takes a whole lot of weight to come down to 1 pound of fiber. And in 1906 to 1960, they were used in the timber industry and were mostly steam-powered. In 1955 to 1965, they were again used in salt for harvesting salt in Inagua and were diesel-powered. Islands with a rail history: Abaco, Andros, Bimini, Cat Island, Crooked Island, Eleuthera, Exuma, Grand Bahama, Long Island, Inagua, New Providence, and others. Now, all of these islands didn't have locomotives, but all of these islands had rails of some form or another, some use. Islands which had hand-powered carts, talking about Little Abaco, Bimini, Cat Island, Crooked Island, Exuma, New Providence, and the West End, Grand Bahama. Islands which had a steam and diesel-powered locomotives. Steam locomotives were found in Abaco, Grand Bahama. I don't think Cat Island, to be honest with you right now. That's still up in the air. And Andros, we found that they made preparations for steam, but they never got past mules. And diesel in Inagua. Types of steam and diesel locomotives. Well, you have the conventional ones. These are the ones like you see in the movie where they just power the wheels by steam articulating in 2 pistons to the side. And then you have geared steam. So what the steam does is power the gear down the middle, and then that gear transfers to the wheels. Now, what is the difference? You also have diesel. Well, the difference in the 2 types is that in the conventional steam, you have to lay the tracks straight and have them on a nice bed. In the geared steam, you know, you can take any old laborers to a certain extent, put down your rails, and in the case of timber, when you run out of timber where you have your rails, you pick up the rails on the last trip, set them down as you go for another 10 miles, and clear another 10 miles of timber. So basically, you find that where you don't have access to a lot of skilled labor, the geared locomotives are the best. And you would find that in the timber industry, they started out with the conventional and eventually gravitated after lots of problems to the geared locomotives. Now, the diesel locomotive was made that were in the Bahamas, were in Inagua, and they were made by the Brockville Company. Now, Brockville normally made smaller engines to, one, take pieces of train from one switch yard to the next to put on different tracks, so right within the switch yard, and 2, in a lot of munitions factories where they needed smaller pieces of equipment to take the munitions around. These are some pictures, so basically you can still find artifacts if you know where to go. In the case of this piece right here, that was found in a place called Millville, which is in Abaco. So you can see, even though all the cars have rusted away, the axles are still there. And this piece here, well, you know, back then, most of the guys coming from the States still kind of practiced the stateside methods. So this piece was found in a place called White Town in Abaco. Basically, the supervisors and the workers stayed separated. And here is myself and Nancy Albury from the Antiquities and Monuments in White Town. And then this piece here, actually, what that was is you have also, when you get in the woods, a stem winch. So what happens is, as you come down, you don't take the train and go to the sides. Basically what they would do is cut a road down the sides, and in the top of the tree, nearest to wherever the pile ends up, you put a pulley, put some rope over it, and put another pulley where you are, and you just, with the stem winch here, which is it really had a kettle, basically, on top of it. With that stem winch, what you would do is pull all the logs that are harvested, put on the train, and carry them to the mill to be processed into lumber. Bahamas locomotive and rail industry uses. One of them was the marine industry. There's a place called Bahamas Cement in Grand Bahama that had two types of cranes. One along the dock that had a crane on top of it to offload their materials. And then they also had in the silos a rail that took the cement pump according to whichever silo they were filling at the time. Bahama Rock has rails that leads out to the ship that they have. And what happens is they have a conveyor belt. And as the conveyor belt loads one part of the ship and that's full, the conveyor belt rides down the rails to complete filling the ship until it's all the way full. The Freeport Container Port, basically they're the largest deep water port in the Western Hemisphere, with the deepest port really, water. They can get into 50 feet of water and bring containers right into the land. And they have large cranes on rail, and they pick the containers off of the ship and bring them onto the land, or take them off the land and put them on the ship. Now, don't think that just because these cranes are big that nothing can happen. There was a tornado one time that rolled all of them down, and when there was no more space on the rails to go, one flipped over with some guys working up top there. They lost three guys. Howell Town, Hog Island. Well, I guess some of the older folks will know where Hog Island is. The developers decided that Hog Island is not a place for a resort, so they changed the name to Paradise Island. But at one time, Hog Island started out as a shipyard, and it was really built by the guy after he had finished building the Royal Victoria Hotel. The Confederate War came shortly after. He realized that ships, I think they say about every 10 voyages need to be serviced. So basically, if you have a ship that needs to be serviced after an average of 10 voyages, and you're going into the United States with contraband to start with, why not service them in the Bahamas where you're not being boarded? So Howell Town was a little place in Paradise Island where they had a shipyard, and the rails would bring the ships onto the land, out of the sea. Spanish Wells and Stella's Maris and West End Grand Bahama. Well, West End doesn't have an active wind system to bring boats into their shipyard anymore because they don't have a shipyard anymore, but Stella Maris and Spanish Wells still do. And in the case of Spanish Wells, they actually have to stop the traffic whenever they bring a boat into their shipyard because land is prime in Spanish Wells, and what happens is they just take a section out of the road that has the incline into the sea, bring up their ship, put the section back in, let the traffic go by. A second industry user was the salt industry, and in 1855 to 1870, there was a tramway servicing the salt pans from the, back then, the old town pans to where they would bring it to ship off. And there was, in fact, the place got the name after a while, Tram Bay. The boats would come into Tram Bay, pick up the salt, which was brought by rail on donkey carts from the salt pans. There was a private salt pan owner in Williamstown, Exuma, around about 1858 that used rails to get the salt out to the ships in Williamstown. And then the Morton Salt Company had powered diesel trains when they first started. Basically, their beds were very soft when they first started. And basically what a train and the track does is spread the weight out on the sleepers, what they call the sleepers. Those are the pieces that go across that the rails are on. And basically what happens is when the pans were initially dug, because they were soft, they would put down a train track, and over time the salt built up on the bottom and caked very hard. So after a while they didn't need the trains anymore and could actually put trucks into the salt pans on the residual bottoms made of the hard salt. So basically that's why it only lasted for about the first 10 years of the operation down here in Inagua. Now, even though you may not see rails in a certain place like Inagua anymore, well, if you look here, they're using the old rails to make a little garage for their car. And you can see on this picture here, even though the rails are here, this is Tram Bay, you can see where they were, because they were there long enough before rusted or being taken away, that the sea actually washed the engraved stone. There was one more industry that used, well, not locomotives, but rails and hand carts, and that was the sisal industry. In a different part of Inagua, in the late 1800s, it was used. In Little Abaco, they had about 13 miles of rail. In Nassau, what you would now know as Goodman's Bay and the Gulf Coast, was once a sisal plantation, and they used rails out there to take the leaves into the processing house. And not possibly anymore. We now know there's a lady that wrote a book about Chamberlain and his plantation, that they were used in Mastic Point, Andros, to take, and there they had about 7 miles of rail. How you doing, Mrs. Smith? The last user was the lumber industry. The Bahamas Timber Company started out in 1908 in Wilson City, Abaco. The Bahamas Cuba Company took over from the Bahamas Timber Company when they got to Norman's Castle and South Abaco. And then the Abaco Lumber Company took over from the Bahamas Cuba Company, and they harvested South Abaco and then moved the whole operation to Pine Ridge, Grand Bahama, at a place called Swordfish Creek. It was also used in the lighthouse industry. The Imperial Lighthouse Company in Landrail, Crooked Island, during the building of the Bird Rock Lighthouse, had a 4-mile tramway from the rock quarry where they actually sawed the blocks to build the lighthouse with, and then took it out to Landrail Point, put it on the boat, because Bird Rock is a little key off from Landrail Point. Here are some pictures of some equipment. This here was one of the first locomotives, and that was a shape used by the Bahamas Timber Company from 1908 to 1916. This here is off the number 5 railroad that exploded in Pine Ridge, Grand Bahama, killing about 4 or 5 persons, including a 13-year-old girl who was walking down the track. There was one lady said she was washing her clothes and her arm fell into her wash tub from that accident. That was in Well, you know, the story goes that number 5 killed 5 in 45. But it wasn't, no, actually, that guy who, apparently there was a crazy guy going around saying that. And that guy actually, because of his saying, I was able to research the actual date, because people were telling me 1947. So when he said 45, killed 5 at 45, I started back at 45, went to what? 47. It happened on January 21st, 1946. And both the Tribune and the Guardian carried stories of the year. And on the bottom here, you can see, yes, my pointer decided to pick. In the bottom left corner, you can see them setting the rails in the salt pan. And in the bottom right corner is the rails, the actual locomotive, and you can see a lot of the cars already filled, and that's the harvester following behind it, filling the cars as they go. And then there are the people in the rail and locomotive history of the Bahamas. In the top left-hand corner is Mr. Farquharson. He started out as a mechanic on the locomotives, and he eventually worked his way up to vice president of the Morton Salt Company before retiring in Inagua. In the top right is J. Russell Wilson Sr. Now, Junior. J.R. Russell Sr. was a guy that started out with the timber operation in Abaco. He was only about 18, 19 years at the time. And as a 19-year-old, the company that trusted his decision and his ability to supervise men, that they actually had over 50 men under his direction. Because of his good results with his men, they actually cut him into the ownership, because he even got some of the work done for them in Nassau with getting their paperwork straight, because they was actually working undercover for the first 2 years without a license. Well, after the early 1920s, bootlegging came to West End Grand Bahama, and he decided there was more money in bootlegging than in timber. So he went and made his fortune in West End Grand Bahama with the Maury Roberts Company, which is still around, I think, as a liquor merchant. So after bootlegging ended in the mid-1930s, he had enough money to buy out the rest of the timber company and made it the Abaco Lumber Company. And the fact that he became the MP for South Abaco didn't hurt. So he finished logging the rest of Abaco. And while Abaco was reviving itself, because it takes about 20 years for the pine to grow back, he took the operation for Abaco. Soon after he got the Abaco, he died, and his son here and his widow took over the operation. Now, his younger brother, who was just a child at the time, told me that basically what happened was Wallace Groves realized this was his way to enter Grand Bahama after serving his time in jail in the U.S. and getting his money out of the U.S.
Wallace Groves?
Wallace Groves, yes. And he convinced his lawyer, who was a member of Parliament, Sir Stafford Sands, to put price control on the lumber, which ruined the profit and caused them to sell out for $100,000. Well, out of that $100,000, he was able to make $4.5 million, is what he started Freeport with the money he got out of the U.S. And as a matter of fact, there was one woman owner of the locomotives. Well, basically Wallace Groves was an American. And he had initially an American wife who was an actress, and when he got sent to jail, well, she promptly dumped him. Well, not a problem, because he was paying the hairdresser good. So he married the hairdresser after the first wife divorced him. And the hairdresser was also a Canadian citizen. so she could buy crown land in the Bahamas, being Canadian citizen and tied in with the British. And, you know, why not put it in your wife's name if you're a convicted felon? And she actually started out with the Abaco Lumber Company after they bought it from J.W. Roberts, which means she was the only female owner that we know of a locomotive in the Bahamas. And the last gentleman here is still alive. He is the last living locomotive driver that we know of the locomotives in Grand Bahama. Well, here is the presentation. Thank you for listening. And a lot of people that don't even realize that we had a rail and locomotive history in the Bahamas. And actually, yeah, exactly. And believe it or not, the rail and locomotive history of the Bahamas is older than two-party politics in the Bahamas.
Welcome to Them Bahamians. Them Bahamians is a media initiative of the Bahamian American Cultural Society. Today we're here at the Kendall Isaac Gymnasium here in the Bahamas, Nassau, the Bahamas, for the National Book Fair 2013 Bahamas, which is being sponsored by the Ministry of Education and the Bahamian American Cultural Society. My name is Beryl Edgecombe and I'm going to be hosting today's show. And my guest today is Darius Williams. Welcome, Darius.
Thank you.
Good. Pleasure having you with me today.
Pleasure's mine also.
Good. So you're one of the Bahamian authors,
Yes,
that's participating in the National Book Fair.
Yes, I am.
Tell me, when did you first become interested in writing? Was that something that you started as a youngster, as a student in school, or you picked it up?
Well, basically what happened was when I was in high school, I would write for my school's newspaper, and that carried on to college. Obviously, after getting out of college, most of my writing was to deal with work until I started with this particular book, The Rail and Locomotive History of the Bahamas.
Okay, so you attended college. Was that here at College of the Bahamas? Or?
No, I attended college at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia.
Oh, okay, all right. And and what did you study?
My field was mechanical engineering.
Mechanical engineering.
Yes.
Okay, so did employment in the United States, or you decided to come back to Bahamas?
I came back home, and after I came back home, I actually had a scholarship with the oil refinery in Freeport, Grand Bahama. At that time, they had stopped refining and were on a hiring freeze. So I got in with the power company. I was at the power company for 10 years. I was with a company named Syntex for 10 years. They made the base product at that time for naproxen. And actually, that's the brand that goes into Aleve. I don't know if you know the over-the-counter painkiller called Aleve.
Right.
It's heavily advertised.
Uh-huh.
And when that plant closed down, then I went on my own. I've been on my own now for 13 years.
For 13 years. Now, is Grand Bahama your home, or is it, where were you born?
Long story. I was born in Roxani, Lustra. My father was a family island commissioner. And basically, I lived there for my first 2 years of existence. Went on to a place called Sandy Point, Abaco for a year. Went on to Crooked Island, Long Key, and Acklands for 3 years. On to Andros for a year, and then we ended up in Nassau. So all of those things happened before I was really 7 years old, and from 6 on to 18 to 17 really, I spent in Nassau and went to high school in Nassau. At 17 I went off to college, and then at 22 I came back home.
Okay, so you say your father was Island Commissioner?
Family, we call them now Family Island.
Family Island Commissioner. Yes. Okay, what does that mean, Family Island Commissioner? What type?
Basically what happened is the population of the islands a little small, so therefore what happens is they send one representative who is the representative for government on that particular island. He also holds court issues driver's licenses, basically all and sundry that deals with the government. He's their representative on the island. Some islands have one, some islands have two, some I think there was no islands with three by that time.
I see. Okay. So is he still a family owned island commissioner, or?
Actually, he's departed now. But,
Oh, he's departed. Okay.
Yeah, he was retired. He actually rose into the ranks, and when we came to Nassau, he went with the Boys Industrial School, and later on he went with the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Works, and also Housing and National Security, and rise up to what we call a permanent secretary, which is the top non-political administrator in a government department.
Okay. So your father is originally from where? Which island?
He was born in Nassau, but he hailed from a place called Long Key, which is close to Crooked Island in Auckland.
Oh, Long Key, Crooked Island. Okay. And the last name Williams?
Right.
Okay.
It was basically one of my forefathers came to that area to help build the Bird Rock Lighthouse, so that's how the Williams name got into Long Key.
Okay, so the Williams name, is that a loyalist trace? You can trace to the lawyers?
There is a loyalist, but it is my understanding that our branch of the Williams came from a guy who was recruited into the West Indian Regiment from Guyana.
Oh, okay.
And eventually retired to Stanyard Creek Andrews.
Okay, so you're Guyana linkage there.
Well, that's how could I put it? There's no part of my family history that is more recent than 5 generations
I see.
outside the Bahamas. But if you really want heritage, there's Guyanese, there's English, there's Italian, there's African, and also Swedish.
Swedish, okay. Who's the Swedish
The Swedish
linkage?
The Swedish linkage is the Tanquess.
Okay.
They came here and settled in Long Island, and basically all of the Tanquesses in the Bahamas carry a common heritage.
Okay. Well, you know, my ancestor from Sweden also.
Yeah, so somewhere down the line we're family.
Yeah. We're Tanquesses as well.
Right.
Yeah.
From Long Island, right?
Great. Yeah. Can we just stop for a second? Okay. So let me ask you. What about your mom? Your mother?
Yeah. My mother actually started out as a teacher, and in the Bahamas they had a system where they called monitors. So basically, the older children at the time, school leaving age was 14, would go and take on the younger students because there was a shortage of teachers. So they gave them a little stipend to help the head teacher.
Right.
And from then, the more promising ones went to Nassau and summer school and became qualified teachers. So basically, she started out as a qualified teacher, but once she started going around with my father, she just concentrated on being a homemaker.
So she's the Swedish side of your family?
Yes, she has the Swedish side. The Tanquess is on her side. Basically, her mother was a Tanquess, and then my grandfather on her side was a Burroughs.
Okay, Tanquess Burroughs. So I have the same Tanquess Burroughs. I have that kind of connection, combination in my heritage as well. Yeah, my mother is a Tanquess, and my father is the Burroughs line. Yeah, and both of them are from Long Island, Bahamas.
Right.
Yeah. Now you've written a book about railroad. Let's get it right here.
Rail and locomotive history of the Bahamas. Yes.
Yeah, that seemed to be a silent. No one knows about the locomotive and rail.
The locomotive part kind of ended in '65. The rail part of it is still active. So
rail.
Basically, what happened is also all of the locomotives, none of it was in Nassau. So basically, because it was not in Nassau, not many people kind of remember it. There are a lot who did remember, but not many.
So I mean, it was servicing the rail and locomotive a problem? Why it just kind of totally phase out altogether?
I wouldn't say so. What basically happened was where they used trains before, they ended up using trucks. after road building equipment became a little more readily available.
So where do they have the rail? The rail?
The rails were on at least 11 islands of the Bahamas in some form or the other, whether we're talking about it being on land or in the case of Eleuthera, where it was actually in the sea as a shipwreck.
Ah, okay.
And therefore, you know, it's all about the and therefore you have rails on a lot of islands. You got it on Abaco, you had it on Grand Bahama, you had it, some of it in Nassau near a place called Goodman's Bay, which is now the Bahama development, actually at the Gulf Coast, because that was the sisal plantation.
Okay.
In Abaco and Grand Bahama you had it because there was a pine forest there in which they harvest the pine for timbers. In a place called Kiat Island you had it for the sisal industry, and also in Inagua. In Williamstown, Exuma, you had it for salt. Also, you had it for salt in Inagua.
Also Long Island?
Long Island actually has some to take the boats up in shipbuilding not in Clarencetown, but in Stella Maris.
In Stella Maris, I see. Okay, now we had it here in the Bahamas for a while. You would think that here in actually in Nassau, it would have lasted longer than the Family Islands. So where did it hold out longer?
No, it didn't really last long because the sisal industry didn't last that long.
Okay.
Most of the sisal industry was over within 10 years. They just abandoned it there. The company called J.S. Johnson was the ones that had it in Nassau, and they got out of the sisal business and went into the insurance business, and they're one of the only sisal harvesters that is still around today.
Okay. So what about sponge? The sponge, was that the part of the locomotive?
No, sponging didn't. I mean, there was for the marine, for taking boats out of the water. There was a place called Howell in what is now Paradise Island, but at the time was called Hog Island. There were marine rails in both Abaco and still exist today in the Abaco Keys and on a place called Spanish Wells in northern Eleuthera. You also had marine rails for a time in West End.
Okay. Well, let me ask you, why rail and locomotive? Why did you pick that topic?
Well, basically, how the book came about was that I wanted to, when I went into business for myself, put what do we call a pump car, a replica of it, in front of my office. In ode to Freeport coming out of Pine Ridge, which had rails. And basically, it kind of told the story somewhat of the history of Freeport. And basically, I wanted to find a picture of a working pop cart, as they call the little maintenance cart that you pump up and down and you see on the Western movies. I wanted a replica of that, and I wanted a picture to make the replica by. Well, in searching for a picture of this pump cart to make a replica, I found everything but the picture. I found history on the lumber industry in Abaco, the lumber industry and the rails in Grand Bahama. I found pictures that people sent me out of Inagua. I found out about the wreck off of Eleuthera. So after a while, you know, I'm standing here with all this stuff. I didn't get what I wanted, but I'm standing here with all this information, and I said, now what should I do with this? And I decided, well, let's have a go at the book. And initially, I didn't have enough to say just concentrate on locomotives. So that's where I brought the rail portion into it, because there were other industries such as the cement industry, such as the rock crushing industry that use rails, such as the new container port in Grand Bahama that use rails for the cranes to maneuver up and down and take the containers off of the container ships.
Right. So in Grand Bahama, where they have this huge container port, is it the kind of rail system that they have? How do you compare that to what they had? That's 1800, 1900?
Well, I mean, basically it's the same thing. Now,
it's the same thing.
Basically, the one in the container port is set at a much higher precision than the ones that were about the islands. Because most of them were mobile. You know, when you finish cutting lumber within the 10-mile radius of where you're cutting it, well, you need to move on. And so basically all you did, take the train down to the end of the track, pick up the rails. When you get to the other end, start laying them again for 10 miles and cut that 10 miles. And basically the same thing happened in the salt pans. You know, you harvest one salt pan, you take those rails up and go harvest the other salt pan. And basically what happened with the salt pans was they needed them initially because the salt pans had soft bottoms. Because they, you know, came out of kind of the lake bed. And until the residual salt that was left off the cake that was harvested built up to a point where it can withstand truck traffic, they had to use trains.
So when did you write this book, by the way?
That book was written probably about 4 or 5 years ago.
4 or 5 years ago.
Yes.
And are you going to write? Have you been able to find any additional information?
Oh yeah, I'm, you know, as soon as I sell all the books that I have, I can come out with a second edition. Basically, like take for instance, there's a place called Landrail Point in Crooked Island in the Bahamas, and hearing it, it always occurred to me that it may have some kind of relation, land rail.
Right.
So why are you calling it Landrail Point? And obviously, at the time I wrote the book, I did not find out that my father, as I said, is from Long Key, which is close to Crooked Island. And before he died, he took me around to show me where all the property that has been handed down to the generations. And when we went to Long Key, I went to the Landrail Point Public Library. And lo and behold, in the Landrail Point Public Library, there's a story of how these rails were used to get the quarry from 4 miles inland, which is the rock that they sawed up and used to build the lighthouse, the Bird Rock Lighthouse.
Right.
So I now have a story about the Bird Rock Lighthouse and the land rail, and why Landrail Point is Landrail Point, because the Lighthouse Authority out of England used it to build the lighthouse out at Bird Rock and used the local rock that was quarried 4 miles inland.
I see. Okay. So have you started the second book yet, or on rail and locomotive, or is it?
No, I'm basically I would just redo the chapters, and I do have the material. So as soon as the books are sold, I can start the other one. But it doesn't really make sense right now starting that until the first edition is sold. I don't want to have first edition and second edition at the same time competing against one another.
Right, true.
There is another book that I am working on called The Heritage of Grand Bahama and Its People. That's been a work that's been about 5 years in the making now. I had to put it down for the last year or two because of some of my civic responsibilities. But, you know, some of those are going to start going away, and I should start picking that up again. But that one is much harder to deal with than the first one, in that there's a lot written about Grand Bahama, but you got to find it in various places, and it's just a small amount at a time. And therefore the research on that is much harder, because I'm trying to bring a collection of various bits and pieces, and finally the collage is coming into something which looks like it's going to be an interesting book.
Okay. Now, when you talk about the history of Grand Bahama and its people, Grand Bahama, to my knowledge, was not one of the islands that the loyalists or, you know, came to settle on.
You would think so, but there were a number of loyalists who settled there starting in 1785.
1785,
Yes.
okay, wow.
Now, the situation with Grand Bahama is, at that time, nothing had really taken off.
Okay.
So you find, and the second situation is, although Hawksbill Creek was okay harbor, and Karen Crow out in East End were okay harbor, it could not, in the age of boating, compete with the other islands that had better harbors. So therefore, basically, its claim to fame at that time was corn farming.
I see. Okay, so there were some loyalists that landed in Grand Bahama.
Yes, and you know, basically in 1842, 7 years after the abolition of slavery, there was a census that was taken, and they had something like 26 white people out of 360 people altogether.
Okay, okay, So who were some of the first, say, people of color that came to Grand Bahama?
Well, the first ones were mostly
The slaves and
of these few loyalists who were there.
Okay.
Now, one interesting about Grand Bahama is that around about the time of emancipation, in my research and putting the numbers together, 1/3 of the people of color were free people, 1/3 of them were slaves,
Okay.
and 1/3 of them were apprentices who knew when they were going to be emancipated because they were what we call liberated Africans.
Right, okay.
Basically, the English freed anybody after 1808.
Okay,
Because even though that was before the abolition of slavery, what happened was they had these treaties with everybody else that they would bring no new slaves from Africa, but the slaves that were already here were still slaves for their life at the time.
Right.
Whereas if they caught anybody bringing in new slaves to the new land, wherever they caught them next to, they would release them, and then they would put them at what they call a holder, and that was for them to learn religion and to learn the English language and to learn a trade, normally farming. And those apprenticeships lasted anywhere from 3 years to 14 years.
Wow.
But, like I said, unlike
In the holding area.
or the holding island.
Holding island, okay.
Yeah. And then sometimes the holder died and they got put with somebody else.
I see. Okay.
If their apprenticeship had not run out at the time.
So which part of Grand Bahama are we talking about? Where they
All over.
All over Grand Bahama?
Grand Bahama is something like Long Island. It had populations, small populations all over instead of one major population. Now, the largest population was in 8 Mile Rock, but there were only portions of 8 Mile Rock that had liberated Africans in slavery. The majority of 8 Mile Rock had no slavery or liberated Africans.
Okay. You indicated there's some, real tough searching to find material. Why is that, do you think?
Very little was written at a large scale on Grand Bahama. Basically what happened between 1835, when slavery was abolished, and 1955, when the Grand Bahama Port Authority was founded and created the city of Freeport, not very much happened. All right, I shouldn't bring it to 55, but I should say until bootlegging in the 1920s. Not very much happened there. So basically the people were allowed, and most of the slave owners had abandoned their farms or intermarried, and their Jane was no longer the quote-unquote pure European Jane. So basically the community was very poor, and even though rich in history, now they were also rich in land holdings, but they didn't administer the devolution of the real estate good in the form of wills.
Okay.
So, basically there were probably only 1 or 2 families that paid enough attention to it that they had clear title by the time the Port Authority came around and Aviation was taken advantage of.
So do you think that they're going to pay more attention to preserving the history that's written, so that future writers won't have the problem that you're finding?
Well, if I ever get this book written, it will help a whole lot. Basically, the oral history is one thing. It can take you so far.
So all your research now is done here in Nassau then? And very little.
A whole lot of it is.
Okay. And very little or none at all in Grand Bahama?
Some is done on Grand Bahama, but very little on the written word is done in Grand Bahama. Now, there was some sources like there's a guy by the name of Smith who shared with me a manuscript that his father wrote before he died, but it didn't get published, on the bootlegging industry in West End, Grand Bahama.
Okay.
It's a very valuable document, so I can't say that I don't find any written word in Grand Bahama.
Okay.
But most of the written sources I find in the archives, and believe it or not, even in Parliament.
Okay, so this is your only book you've
That's
written
my
so
only,
far?
That's my
so
only
far.
book. I also, in this book here,
Okay, uh-huh.
which is the Journal of the Bahamas Historical Society.
Right.
I have an article called Resettlement Villages for Emancipated Slaves and Liberated Africans in the Northern Bahamas.
In all the Bahamas.
Yes, and
Okay.
basically, a lot of people don't realize that when slavery was abolished, the government had to find homes for the emancipated slaves and the liberated Africans, because they were no longer really welcome on the slave master's land, because basically they were getting free rent for free work.
So you're which islands were those that were?
Oh, they were all over.
All over?
All over. But in the northern Bahamas, the first two settlements that were surveyed and lots marked out and grants given to liberated slaves and emancipated Africans were Grand Turtle Key in the Abacos and McLean's Town in Grand Bahama.
I see. Okay. Interesting. Well, I wish you much success in that second book, because like you say, there's very little about Grand Bahama that's written or documented,
Right.
and that really is important.
And one of the reasons I call it the heritage of Grand Bahama is named Peter Barrett, who wrote, quote unquote, the history of Grand Bahama. And I found I was still wanting, after reading that book, the Lucayan Indians and the Grand Bahama Port Authority, and very little in between.
Okay, understand that.
And I'm now trying to make sure that my book doesn't include it, because mine is post-Lucayan Indians, so it doesn't include anything about the Lucayan Indians.
Right.
But from the resettlement of Grand Bahama in 1785, it goes from that point up to now.
Yes, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Okay, and best of luck with the rail and locomotive history of the Bahamas.
Right.
Definitely, all the best.